A patrol drone floated out from behind a knife-sharp cliff, and Chaz instinctively crouched when the robot's missile launchers were momentarily pointed at him. But the drone ignored the 5 soldiers huddled in the cliff's shadow near the moon-dusted armored door and moved on as if nothing had happened. It headed towards the antenna complex, an ugly cluster of metal plants sticking out of the ground half a click away. Chaz exhaled in relief. Adam, how long will it take? We're out in the open. They can spot us here and bring hell any second. Fiddling with the equipment connected to the half-dismantled electronic door lock, the trooper didn't react to the commander's grumbling. Instead, Chaz heard the voice of Andrei Chudin in the intercom. Relax, Chaz. I got it. Stuff's scrambled good. No drone will get through. Andy was responsible for electronic surveillance countermeasures. He had additional equipment built into his combat suit, plus he'd brought along a small but powerful jamming device. Chaz turned toward the airlock doors just in time to watch the heavy flaps slide open, revealing the way inside the intercon base. The intel was good. There were no defense systems inside the airlock, so much for heavy security measures. The first ones to go inside were Sheng Baishi and Sunita. Chaz could never remember correctly Sunita's last name, let alone pronounce it. Sheng and Sunita were the shock troopers of the group. Their spacesuits had extra armor and expanded ammunition, and both were more heavily armed than the rest of the group. The temptation to blow up the inner airlock door was strong, but Chaz knew it would not have the desired effect. On the contrary, the emergency automatics would go off. All the hatches between the compartments would fall down, and they would have to blast through their way to the mission's objective, while all the station personnel and all the perimeter defenses would be trying their best to finish off the group. They'd have to keep tiptoeing, hovering over every closed door, and trying not to be seen by the patrol drones. Adam poked at a panel on the airlock wall. The outer doors closed, and the airlock filled with air through the vents under the ceiling. As soon as the pressure equalized to normal, the inner doors opened. Apparently, the base designers thought that if someone managed to get into the emergency airlock, there was no point in forcing them to go through the security checks again. What if the person who entered passed out inside the airlock? Chaz quickly gave the engineers his respect. Yes, they'd left a hole in the station's defenses, but they'd done it for humane reasons. As a former lifeguard, he couldn't help but appreciate that approach. Intercon's third lunar base was carved into the rock of the satellite. It was a system of tunnels and various rooms, from personal quarters to crawler hangars and orbital shuttles, in the shape of a disk about a click in diameter. A squad of Transprom stormtroopers, commanded by Chaz, had to get to Sector D, where a research laboratory was located. It was working on some new weapon known as Project Sigma. The squad's objective was to get good intel on the project while destroying the facility if possible. The stormtroopers weren't privy to the technical details of Project Sigma, and Chaz wasn't sure anyone in the squad, except for Chudin, who had a bachelor's degree in physics, would understand anything. The inner door opened. Behind it was a small room. Racks along the walls with spare spacesuits, weapons, and emergency medical equipment. Just outside the room's doors was an intersection. One corridor went radially deep into the base, 2 branches to the left and right, obviously, a circular gallery around the perimeter. Chudin checked his comm readout. "This way," he said, and tiny copies of the station's blueprint appeared on the inside surface, with a red line running off to the right along the ring gallery. Sheng and Sunita stepped forward, followed by the others. The operation had entered a critical stage. The first casualty was Sheng. After they had collected all the memory crystals from Project Sigma, the base's security system finally started to wake up. Chudin's equipment was hiding the exact location of the squad, which was also moving quickly back to the emergency airlock. But the corridors were swarming with drones. There were no human guards. Apparently, Intercon didn't want to keep a large contingent on the half-conserved base. Most likely, it was just a few remote control officers operating the swarm of combat drones that Intercon had always had an advantage in producing. Sheng was trailing the group, covering the rear, and at one of the intersections, he was suddenly cut off from the others by an armored bulkhead that rapidly popped out of the wall. By the time Adam managed to pick the shutter's electronic lock, it was too late. Sunita and Chaz had finished the last 3 drones, remaining from about a dozen, but Sheng was stretched face down on the floor. There were several holes in his spacesuit, smoke billowing from them. Under other circumstances, they would have taken his body, but now it would be pure suicide. Andy managed to break the connection between the base's central station and the periphery, so they didn't have to blow up and burn through countless doors on their way out. And the combat drones jumped out at the group only in free search mode, without coordinating their efforts. When the group finally reached the emergency airlock, everyone had, at best, 1/5 of their ammunition left, and smoking wreckage dotted nearly every intersection of the corridors they had traveled. Adam and Sunita had died when the group had gotten barely 100 steps away from the Intercon base. 3 external patrol drones rose one after another from a camouflaged shaft not marked on any base schematics. 2 plasma cannon charges struck Adam, practically vaporizing him on the spot. The third was intended for Sunita, who was following, but she managed to dodge and hit one of the drones with a pulse rifle, after which she was flayed by the lasers of the remaining 2 vehicles. Chaz and Andy destroyed the drones using the last 2 hypervelocity missiles. They traveled the remaining few clicks to the landing boat, without incident. Andy was the first aboard. Chaz lingered momentarily, looking at the unfriendly, jagged rocks that ring the crater where the Intercon base was located. Another mission was completed. Another small success into the piggy bank of victory over the damned Intercon aggressors. A few more dead comrades. He would remember and be sure to even the score. As he turned toward the bot, it suddenly turned into a blinding blob of flame, throwing Chaz away and extinguishing his consciousness. How many times have I told you it's a bad recipe? There was the sound of shattering glass and an inarticulate cry from somewhere in the distance, clearly a restrained scolding. If you want to drink this stuff, be my guest, but don't give it to me. His head tingled a little, but overall Chaz felt bearable. When he opened his eyes, he saw the stars above him and the Earth's disk, a horrible one, braided with poisonous yellow clouds and mottled with the sores of giant cyclones. A familiar daily picture for those who lived on the visible side of the moon. But nobody could now live on the Earth. You're just a grumpy, lazy old man. If the first voice was a man's, it was answered by a woman. Chaz noted how well they could be heard, as if the conversation was not on the radio, but he was in the same room as the speakers. If it were up to you, nothing would ever change in the world. So, I put a little spice in my beer. Don't you ever want to try something new? All right, I'll get it. Chaz sat down carefully and looked around. What he saw amazed him so much that he thought he was either dreaming or delirious. In a small area, cleared of moon rock debris, stood a village house, a good wooden house clad in green-painted boards with a galvanized tin roof, a spacious porch, and even a brick chimney from which, Chaz blinked in surprise, a light smoke was wafting. In front of the house was a small, neatly trimmed lawn. In fact, Chaz was sitting on the grass, on which stood a simple table of unplanked boards. Behind the table, on a long bench, sat an elderly man in faded overalls and a plaid flannel shirt, smoking a hemp pipe. While Chaz was staring at this picture, absolutely impossible on the surface of the moon, the door of the house opened, spilling a warm yellow light, and out stepped a young woman dressed about the same as the old man, except that she wore dainty boots instead of sturdy leather shoes. She was holding 3 beer bottles. "The 4th pipe today," the woman said reproachfully, putting the bottles on the table. "And it's not even evening yet. Dad, you promised." The old man inhaled with pleasure, let out a cloud of smoke, and sighed. "That's what comes with the age," he said, looking straight at Chaz. "If I'd known what was in store for me, I'd never have gotten old. One would think that age should have some privileges, right, sir?" Without waiting for an answer from the speechless Chaz, the old man shook his head and said, "My name is Wilbur Johnson, but you can just call me Will. And this nuisance is Susie, my daughter. Susie, say hello to our guest." The woman smiled at Chaz and gave him a friendly wave. "Come and join us," she said. "We could use some help to settle our dispute. Are you ready to try a spiced beer, or are you a true old-timer like my father?" Chaz stood up, feeling like Alice in the rabbit hole, and walked over to the table. Susie had already pulled up 2 wicker chairs, just like the ones Chaz had seen in the old photo album his parents had taken from Earth during the evacuation, and sat down in one of them. Chaz gripped the back of the second one and looked around hesitantly, not knowing what he expected to see. Reality hit him like a hand-to-hand combat instructor's fist. The mowed grass stretched for only 20 feet. After that, it was all angular fragments of rocks overlaid with regolith. And further on, an ugly black crater gaped, around which the mangled and melted remains of the landing boat were scattered. "What did you expect, son?" came the old man's voice. "An orbital railgun is no joke." Chaz spun around instantly, his hand slamming down on his hip where his holster had been, but found only emptiness. "Who the hell are you?" He squeezed out the first words, fleetingly amazed at how hostile and rude his voice sounded after the greetings of the impossible house's inhabitants. "Whose side are you on? Intercon or Transprom?" The old man sipped his beer and set the bottle on the table. "Well, that's much better," he said in a low voice. "Son, what do you think? Do we look like enemies, or any sort of soldiers in this stupid war of yours?" He shook his head. "You're all the same crazy breed. You've ruined your home planet, and now you've come here to kill each other. Don't you ever get tired of it?" Chaz opened his mouth to rebuke the old man, as the bitterness and pain of losing his comrades was still burning his soul. But then he looked at the yellow light in the windows and the wide-open door of the house, at the green grass beneath his feet, at the old man's calm, wise smile, at the freckles and the red hair of the woman gathered in a braid, looked into her friendly gray eyes, and he said not at all what he was about to say. "I'm sick of it," he said with a sigh, and sat down in a vacant chair, which was surprisingly comfortable. Then he opened his helmet's visor and sipped several large gulps of cold, tart beer that tasted of cardamom and cinnamon. "You don't have even the closest idea how much,"